Okay, in continuing with the domain Eukarya unit, we are now going to talk about kingdom fungi. So, introduction. Major characteristics of fungi: they can be unicellular or multicellular. They are eukaryotic, as is everything in domain Eukarya, heterotrophs, decomposers, and their cell walls are composed of chitin, which is, unlike plants, they have cellulose in their cell walls. So, important structures. In general, there's a high surface area to volume ratio. So, imagine a mushroom. It's a large area if you look at the surface, but there's not a lot of volume. Mushrooms are very light, they're very airy. Couple major structures. The hyphae provides this larger surface for the nutrients to come in. They are made to be growing on solid surfaces, which is why mushrooms grow on solid surfaces. The mycelium is the net-like mass formed from the hyphae, and then the fruiting body is, of course, the part that you are most familiar with, that above ground portion of the fungi. So here's that in picture form. So the mycelium is everything below ground, and then the fruiting body, the hyphae, goes up into the fruiting body, and then the fruiting body is this whole structure that you imagine when you imagine a mushroom. So about the structure, the septa. So if you think septa, think segment. Okay, so septa are just cross walls that divide the hyphae. If we go back, remember the hyphae is this part up here, and it's technically part of the mycelium too. So there's two types. There's septate fungi, and there's aseptate. So septate has septa, and aseptate doesn't. So types of fungi nutrition. This is how they get their food. Saprotrophic, this is a term we've been using, so it means they're decomposers. They recycle nutrients from dead organisms. Parasitic means they absorb nutrients from living organisms, like this poor insect over here. And mutualistic is when they live in a mutualistic relationship, so they both benefit. Types of reproduction then. We have sexual and asexual. If you notice, spore production is on both. So they can do spore production asexually and sexually. So here we go. It's the asexual sexual lifestyle of most fungi. This is how most fungi reproduce. The spores are released, and that's what begins this life cycle. They can do it two different ways. So heterophilic, hetero means different, opposite mating type, and this develops through meiosis, much like a sperm and egg cell combine to make a zygote, same thing. Homophilic, remember homo means same, with itself through mitosis, because it's going to be an exact copy. The sporophore then is that fruiting body, or this top area here, and it's what produces the spores. In general, you should view spores as adaptations for survival. It's what's enabled survival of fungi. And the classification of fungi into their different phyla is based on the type of sporophore it produces. There are a couple other methods that we should talk about too of spore release. So in most fungi, there's a fluid buildup that causes these spores to be ejected. These are the fungi that don't do your typical spore production. So you have bird's nest fungi, which water drops make it explode. You have puffballs, which do a little like smoke puff when they explode. And then you have stinkhorns here, which attract insects because they smell like dung. So think about flies. Flies are attracted to garbage, gross, nasty smells. So if the fungi smells gross, the insects are going to be there, and then it causes it to explode, and all the spores go everywhere. So asexual reproduction, then one form, is budding. All it is a new cell develops while attached. You see all these little buds forming here? This is what yeast cells do. Okay? Eventually this membrane will pinch off, and that's how you'll get two new cells. Fragmentation, on the other hand, is just breaking into fragments. The mycelia, if we remember, is all that ropey looking stuff. That's just going to break into fragments and then land somewhere else and grow more. And this, important to note, it occurs in fungi that have lost the ability to produce spores. So those that can't produce spores work in this method. So here's our classification. There are 5 phyla total that we will be talking about. And we're going to go through each one of those just very briefly. So here is also your ancestral view of all of these forms. So your common ancestors down here, you branch off. So these two are more closely related than like these two would be, or these two. So phylum the Chytridiomycota, these are your chytrids. They're aquatic, they can be saprotrophic, and they use flagellated spores, which means, as you look in this picture, their spores have flagella, which help them swim. You know what I'm trying to spell. So the spores have flagella, but when they're aquatic, that's how their spores have to move. They can't blow away with the wind. Phylum Zygomycota, this is your common molds. This is what you think of when you think of mold on your bread, for example. They are terrestrial, meaning they live on land, and they form mutualistic relationships with plants. They can reproduce both ways, and there's two different forms of hyphae in bread mold. So you have your stolons, which spread across, and then your rhizoids, which penetrate. So the stolons are these things here that spread across, and then your rhizoids are all the little things that come up. So here's your life cycle. So it starts here. It's going to release these spores. They're going to eventually come back and then keep the process up because you have, and it's sexual reproduction because you have so many different ones on a piece of bread, for example. So the Phylum Ascomycota, this is your sac fungi. They're mostly multicellular, although yeast is unicellular. They can be saprophytic, parasitic, or mutualistic, so they kind of cover all ranges, and they reproduce both ways. Phylum Basidiomycota, this is your club fungi, or all of your mushrooms that you typically think of. They're multicellular, they're terrestrial, they can be all three forms of nutrient gaining, and they rarely reproduce asexually, so they're mostly a sexual reproducer. And something to note, when you go through the forest, these are your major decomposers of wood. And here's just another view. We will get into this much more when we dissect a mushroom, but the basidiocarp is the fruiting body, and the underside is the basidia. Okay, this is where all the spores are. So the basidia are all these gills under here, and all the spores come from there, and they go out and get released into the environment. Phylum Deuteromycota, this is just your imperfect fungi. This is kind of like your junk drawer fungi phylum, kind of like how protists are the junk drawer of Eukarya domain. So there's not a lot known about them. They might not even be considered a true phylum, but we need to talk about just a couple of things that are in here. So like penicillins in here, yeast infections, athlete's foot. These are the things that you're most common with in terms of causing issues for humans. Fungi also have symbiotic relationships. So you have your lichens and your mycorrhizae. So your lichens, they're not fungi. That's what they have a relationship with fungi. So the algae provides the food for both of them, but the nice thing is here, the hyphae web helps the algae grow. So it gives like this big net-like kind of area for the algae to be able to grow on. Mycorrhizae is helping plants. So it's a fungus in a plant. It absorbs minerals for the plant. It increases the root surface area, which is something plants want. And then the fungi, as a result, gets carbs and amino acids from the plant. So here we go. So the lichens, they provide this dense web. The fungi provide this dense web, and then the algae produce the sugars. So it's kind of like a good back and forth relationship. They're very resilient, but they're also bioindicators, which means they are sensitive to that environmental change. So if there's a big environmental change, they're going to show it first. Mycorrhizae, on the other hand, results with plants. So if you look, here's your width out, here's your width. Huge difference in the amount of growth. Look at all of this space, all of this root area. This is why the plants are more successful, because they have a larger root system. And then some benefits of fungi, so bioremediation, recycling of nutrients to clean the environment. If they eat dead and decaying things, they're getting those things out of the environment and cleaning it up. We also use them for medicine. So it's your source of penicillin, which reduces high blood pressure, contractions during birth. Medicines that have fungi in them are going to do these things. And then foods. So we eat mushrooms, yeast, alcohol, cheese. All of these things have fungi in them and they benefit humans. But there are some other problems. So you have your harmful fungi. So destruction of plants and crops, like American elm trees. That's a big issue right now. And then parasitic fungi. So they actually infect insects like this ant up here, and we'll watch a video in class. And then you have things like your athlete's foot, your ringworm, your yeast infections.